Your senses soften as if you're resting in a secure military zone with engines humming far below. Tonight's tale unfolds with slow precision, guiding your thoughts gently downward. The dead moons always look clean from orbit. A ring of gray rock, a belt of rusted industry, sunlight that has no warmth. The kind of place you can mistake for silence until you put boots down and your suit starts counting the ways you can die. We came in low and staggered, riding the shadow of the refinery spine so the storm field wouldn't taste our descent. There was no air to burn, just a thin smear of ionization crawling over the drop shells as the electromagnetic weather clawed at the hulls. The readouts in my visor flashed like a nervous animal, static in the teeth, a mild tremor through the jawbones that the suit dampers couldn't fully stop. I remember thinking, without feeling it, that I'd been doing this too long to still notice. We were corridor clearance, not the glamorous kind, not the kind that makes banners. We opened passages through places that did not want passages opened. We did it slow because speed gets you cut in half. We did it quiet because noise is a beacon. We did it with the understanding that the corridor was never for us. It was for whatever came after. My designation in the logs was Rook 17. I stopped using my name years ago. Names are for people who expect to be remembered. We landed in a trench of collapsed conveyor housings, steel ribs frozen into a half arch above us. Chemical frost lay on everything like powdered bone. It wasn't snow. It was residue-condensed compounds vented over decades, now crystallized in vacuum. It clung to suit joints. It crept into seals. It ate at polymers if you let it sit. The squad moved in a line broken into pairs. The point pair carried the long sensor mast and the cutter. The middle pair carried the drone pod. I was in the rear third with the ECM puck and patch kit because I was the one who could fix suit breaches fast enough to keep lungs from boiling. Orders came as text packets and icon bursts in the visor. No voice, no chatter. Storm field interference ate comms and the enemy listened to anything it could parse. We used minimal bandwidth, minimal exposure, hand signs when we were close enough. A system that had been built by the dead and inherited by the tired. We advanced along a service canal filled with frozen lubricant and shattered ceramics. The refinery belt rose on both sides. Columns, pipes, catwalks, pressure vessels split open like ribs. The place had once been a machine. Now it was a corpse. The corridor we needed was simple on paper. A straight line through the belt toward a mass driver gate on the far side. Open it, hold it long enough, and the heavier units would flow through. That gate mattered. Everything else was noise. The enemy had made it not simple. They had rooted siege growths into the dead metal. Biomechanical structures that looked like swelling tumors built out of scavenged steel and living matter. They used the refinery as a skeleton. Their artillery was not a gun. It was a pulsing organ that spat dense flechettes and plasma-sheared fragments on command, guided by signal threads we could not see, but could feel as pressure in the skull when they fired. The first one woke when our forward drone crested a broken catwalk. There was no warning siren, no dramatic reveal, a subtle change in the sensor feed, a bloom of heat where there should have been cold. Then the drone's image fractured into glitter as something shredded it mid-frame. A half-second later, the corridor filled with the spray of razor fragments, moving too fast for the eye and too precisely for accident. The pieces hit the conveyor ribs above us, ringing them like bells in vacuum, vibrating through our boots. One fragment punched into the chest plate of the soldier ahead of me. It did not explode. It simply made a new hole. I watched his suit pressure drop in a smooth line on my visor. I watched him stiffen as the emergency sealant fired. I watched the sealant fail because the fragment had torn the layer it needed to bond to. There was no scream. There was no sound. There was only a man's hands clenching once, then opening, then drifting slightly as the last warmth left his fingers. We did not stop to mourn. The suit had already recorded his vital collapse. His designation flipped to gray. The line moved. The point pair deployed the cutter drone, a squat machine with a plasma throat and a sensor eye that blinked in infrared. It crawled up the refinery wall using magnetic pads and hugged the structure so tight it looked like a parasite. It moved toward the heat bloom. The siege growth fired again. This time, the flechettes came in a fan aimed where we would have been if we had done the obvious thing. The point pair had anticipated it. They were already tucked behind a pressure vessel that had once held something flammable. The flechettes tore through empty space and embedded in metal, leaving a constellation of holes. We responded with method, not rage. Rail weapons are honest. They throw metal at obscene speed. They do not care about atmosphere. They do not care about recoil when your suit braces. They care about line of sight and mass. We did not have line of sight. The siege growth was embedded behind layers of scrap and living tissue. So we did what corridor clearance always does. We peeled the environment apart. The cutter drone reached the growth and latched on. Its plasma throat opened like a mouth and began to eat. It carved a trench through frozen steel and organic matter, slagging both into a glowing runnel that immediately cooled into black glass. The siege growth responded by shifting its heat signature, trying to pull back deeper into the structure like an animal retreating into burrow. It did not get far. The drone kept chewing. While it chewed, we spread adhesive sensor tags along the corridor walls, cheap pads that listened for signal pulses and mapped their direction. The enemy's control architecture used pulses like breath. We couldn't decode them, but we could triangulate. 3 more blooms appeared on the map. 3 more siege growths anchored along the corridor, waiting to overlap their fire. We didn't rush. Rushing is a way to die faster. We advanced in small bounds, using debris as cover and low gravity to make jumps that would have torn knees in a heavier world. Every bound ended with a pause while sensors listened. Every pause ended with a decision made by icons and hand signs. When the second growth fired, it hit a decoy drone we tossed into open space. The decoy shattered. The growth's heat signature flared in satisfaction, if machines can be satisfied. Then the point pair's plasma-cutting rounds hit its exposed node. The rounds didn't explode. They burned through. Plasma-cutting rounds are for doors and armor. They carry a charge that turns into a narrow, long-burning jet on impact. They don't make pretty fireballs. They make holes. They make soft things into vapor and hard things into molten edges. The growth tried to retract. The jet followed the hole and cooked what was inside. The heat bloom collapsed. The signal pulse stopped. We repeated the process on the third growth. It cost us another drone and a man who took a flechette through his thigh actuator. In low gravity, a leg failure is a death sentence if you cannot anchor. He drifted, spinning slowly, blood blooming under his suit fabric where the actuator had torn. We grappled him back with a tether. We sealed what we could. The actuator lag remained. He became a burden, but burden is not a word you use out loud. Burden is a fact. By the time the corridor was open, our oxygen reserves had dipped below comfortable margins, and my suit coolant patch had failed once, leaving a thin ice sheen around the leak site that glimmered in sunlight. We reached the passage marker, the point in the refinery canyon where the last siege growth had been anchored. It was a cavity now. Melted steel, burned organic residue, a stink you could taste through filters. The drone's plasma throat had left a smooth trench like a surgical cut. Inside, something had been alive. Our orders updated: secure the corridor, sweep for secondary threats, locate the liaison. The liaison was why we had been sent, whether they admitted it or not. Corridors could be cut by anyone with enough bodies and drones. Liaisons were rarer. Liaisons carried information, or were believed to. We found it in a maintenance vault tucked beneath a collapsed reactor housing. The vault had once been a quiet space for human technicians. Now, it had become a shrine. There were labor bodies there, thin figures in patched pressure garments, clustered around the vault opening as if guarding it. They did not run when we approached. They did not raise weapons. Some of them did not even look at us. Their visors were frosted from within, as if their breath had been too thin, too weak to keep the glass clear. They moved like people who had been trained to move only when permitted. In the center of them sat the liaison. It was not physically imposing. Its suit was intact and heavier than the laborers, with reinforced collar and chest plating. Its helmet was smooth, with no external markings. It sat with hands resting on knees, posture straight, as if waiting for judgment. The laborers knelt around it, hands pressed to the floor plating. I did not feel triumph. I felt nothing. We approached with rails leveled, because even a kneeling figure can kill you. The liaison raised its head slightly. The laborers flinched as if a whip had cracked, though there was no sound. We secured it with restraint bands and a suppressor collar that jammed local signal emissions. The collar was a heavy ring that clamped over the suit's neck seal. It hummed faintly, a vibration that the bones could feel. The laborers watched the collar go on as if watching a priest being chained. The liaison did not resist. When we pulled it upright, it moved with cooperation that felt rehearsed. When we dragged it into the corridor, the laborers followed at a distance until a sharp gesture from our point pair sent them back. They stopped immediately, as if their muscles had been switched off. We tried conventional interrogation in the way you can when you have no dialogue, gesture prompts, visor displays, basic physical cues. We offered water and heat. We showed symbols. We showed maps. We demanded. We waited. The liaison's helmet turned toward each prompt with slow precision. Its breathing rate, visible in the suit telemetry we hacked through the collar, stayed flat. No stress spike, no fear, no anger, no attempt to bargain. Hollow. That was the word that formed in my mind, not as an emotion but as a diagnosis. Command sent a new packet, authorization for cognitive access. A module would be deployed from our rear support element. We were to hold position and provide security during the procedure. I had seen cognitive probes before. Not often. They were officially a last resort. They were officially humane compared to physical coercion. They were officially controlled. In practice, they were invasive. They made minds bleed without blood. The handler arrived on a small crawler sled, pushed by 2 support troops. The crawler carried the probe harness, a rigid frame with fiber bundles and contact needles sealed inside sterile sleeves. It looked like medical equipment built by a weapons engineer. The handler was smaller than most infantry, moving with the stiff caution of someone who had chosen to specialize rather than fight. Their suit had extra insulation around the helmet and a thicker backplate where the interface unit sat. They did not look at the liaison as a person. They looked at it as a port. We anchored the liaison against a refinery column and locked its limbs. We set up hard cover. We placed drones in overwatch positions. We dimmed our suit lights. The corridor became a place of waiting, broken by the slow drip of my coolant leak freezing into beads. The handler attached the harness to the liaison's helmet. The sterile sleeves peeled back. Needles extended, not into flesh, into the suit's interface points, designed for maintenance and emergency medical access. The harness bypassed the collar. It didn't need signal. It used direct contact. When the handler initiated the probe, the liaison's telemetry changed for the first time. Heart rate rose. Oxygen consumption spiked. Its hands clenched against restraints. Its helmet tilted back a fraction, as if resisting gravity that wasn't there. The handler's own telemetry showed controlled breathing, minimal movement. They were trained to be a wall. The probe ran in silence. The only external sign was the faint hum of the harness as it drew power and the way frost on the liaison's visor shifted as its breath pattern changed. I kept watch on the corridor. I watched drones flicker as storm interference brushed their feeds. I watched the laborers in the distance, still kneeling in the maintenance vault, as if they had been left in a paused state. After a few minutes, the handler sent a burst, no usable surface content. The liaison carried ceremonial phrases and routing protocols that were not consciously accessible. A second burst followed, permission requested for deeper contact. Command approved, no hesitation. The handler initiated the deeper sequence. This was the part that makes you remember, you are not the one being violated. You are just the one watching it happen. The liaison's telemetry did something I had never seen. Two distinct patterns emerged, like two heart rates layered incorrectly. The suit's sensors weren't built for minds, but they were built for physiological rhythm, and rhythm carries the shadow of what drives it. The handler froze for half a second. Their head tilted slightly, as if listening to a sound none of us could hear. Then they sent a burst of icons that meant dual presence confirmed. I felt the air in my lungs tighten, even through filters. Not fear, not exactly, more like the body recognizing something wrong. The handler continued. The liaison's body went slack, then rigid, then slack again. The restraint bands creaked. Frost flaked off the visor in tiny shards. The telemetry pattern stabilized into two layers, a shallow, human-like rhythm and a deeper pulse that did not match anything I knew. Then the handler sent the packet that changed the mission. Not words. Images and concepts compressed into military shorthand. A schematic impression. The liaison was a node, a relay, a shell. Inside it was a rider signal, an external control structure that inhabited intermediaries the way software inhabits hardware. The liaison's authority was performative, a mask worn to keep the labor caste compliant. The true command was elsewhere, distributed across the belt, pulsing through extraction mines. Alongside that came another concept. The labor caste was not aligned by ideology. They were coerced. Their obedience was a system, not a choice. Their bodies were maintained at minimum survival. Their minds were kept in a narrow corridor of permitted action. And the extraction chain, what they were forced to harvest, was not ore or fuel in the normal sense. It was a phase-reactive slurry, drawn from fracture pockets in the moon's crust, stabilized in refinery coils. When injected into certain field geometries, it allowed short-range transit folds through debris, micro-jumps through wreckage fields that should be impassable. It was how the enemy moved heavy assets without exposing them to orbital fire. It was their mobility. The handler's final burst was a warning. The rider's signal had touched them. There was residual. Contamination. That word appears in every war. Usually it means chemical exposure, radiation, biological hazard. Here it meant something you could not scrub off with solvent. Command's response was immediate: change of objective, deny mobility, disrupt extraction, destroy stabilization coils, prevent enemy transit window. Secondary, avoid capture of cognitive assets. Tertiary, maintain corridor integrity for follow-on units. It was a neat list. It did not include the labor caste. It did not include mercy. It did not include what to do with a liaison who was also a victim. We did not have time to argue, even if we had voices. We moved. The handler detached the harness quickly, hands precise. The liaison slumped, telemetry dropping into flat exhaustion. The collar hummed. The restraint bands held. We left it anchored with a beacon tag that marked it for pickup or disposal. The icon command used was ambiguous: secure. Secure can mean protect or contain. The laborers watched us leave, still kneeling. One of them lifted a hand slightly, as if reaching. The hand stopped mid-air and trembled until it fell back down, permission denied by whatever lived in their system. We followed the refinery lines toward the extraction zone, guided by the schematic the handler had pulled from the liaison's deeper layer. The storm field intensified as we moved out of the canyon shadow. The static in my teeth became constant. My visor flickered twice and recovered. My suit coolant warning blinked amber. The beads of frozen leak on my hip grew. The extraction zone was a cluster of intact coils and tanks sheltered inside a collapsed dome. The dome had once contained atmosphere for processing. Now it was open to vacuum, its inner surfaces coated in frost and soot. Inside, the phase-reactive slurry moved through transparent conduits like dark liquid mercury, pulsing with faint internal light. The labor caste was there, working. They moved in slow lines, carrying sealed canisters, attaching them to couplings, monitoring gauges. Their movements were mechanical but not robotic. They were exhausted people executing routines under pressure they could not name. Their suits were patched with mismatched materials. Their gloves were worn thin. Their oxygen packs were older models with failing seals. They did not look up when we entered. They did not flee. They did not raise alarms. Their obedience system did not include reacting to us unless commanded. We placed ourselves behind structural cover and assessed. The enemy skirmish bodies were present. Heavier suits with reinforced joints, armed with compact rail pistols and cutter blades. They moved among the laborers like shepherds, pausing to correct a hand position, to push a shoulder, to force a faster pace. They did not need to speak. Their authority was physical. The handler sent a burst, rider signal strongest here. The coils were not just processing equipment, they were anchors for the control architecture. Destroying them would cut mobility and disrupt the rider's ability to inhabit intermediaries, at least locally. Command sent another burst, storm cycle predicted in 12 minutes, EMP spike likely. Comms will go dark, complete denial before spike or abort. 12 minutes is nothing when your boots are heavy and your heart is tired. We advanced in the way infantry advances when mercy is not in the kit. Slow, low, using cover, drones crawling ahead under ECM veil. The first skirmish body detected us when a drone's magnetic pad scraped metal. It turned its helmet toward the sound. Its posture shifted. It raised its rail pistol. The point pair's rail shot punched through its chest plate and out the back in a clean line. The body jerked once, then floated slightly as low gravity took it. It did not bleed into vacuum the way people imagine. It vented a mist of oxygen and a few dark droplets that froze instantly. Its limbs drifted. The laborers did not react. One continued attaching a canister to a coupling while a dead armored body floated past within arm's reach. That was when I understood the obedience was deeper than fear. Fear requires a self. Their selves had been narrowed to function. We moved into the dome. 2 more skirmish bodies engaged, firing rails that punched holes in the dome's inner ribs and sent shards of frost spinning. We returned fire with controlled bursts, using the coils as partial cover because metal is metal regardless of what it processes. A rail shot clipped my left thigh actuator. The suit registered impact and lagged. My leg jerked and the joint refused to lock for half a second. In low gravity, half a second is enough to drift wrong. I slapped an anchor puck onto the floor plating and tethered myself before I floated into open line of fire. I did not swear. I did not panic. I noted the lag and adjusted my gait. We reached the primary stabilization coil, a ring of composite material wrapped around a central conduit where the slurry pulsed. The coil hummed with field energy. My visor displayed its stability margin in green, as if it were a normal machine. It was not normal. It felt wrong. The static in my teeth changed pitch as we approached. My tongue tasted copper. We placed shaped charges at 3 points along the coil housing. The charges were designed for metal and composite, not for whatever hybrid this was, but we did not have specialized munitions. Corridor clearance carries what it can. As we placed the charges, one of the laborers turned its helmet toward me. The visor was cracked. Frost had formed inside, turning the face into a blurred shape. Its gloved hand lifted slightly, hovering near the coupling it had been working on. For a moment, the hand trembled as if receiving a new instruction. The laborer's posture stiffened. Then it did something that did not fit the routine. It stepped between me and the coil, body angled as if shielding. It did not plead. There was no voice. There was only the movement. The handler's telemetry spiked. They sent a burst, local autonomy surge, rider signal disrupted by our ECM. Brief window. The laborer held position, shielding the coil not because it loved the enemy, but because it had been trained to protect the process as the only permitted purpose. That purpose was its prison and its identity. I pushed it aside with a controlled shove. Not violent, just enough to clear access. The laborer stumbled and caught itself on a conduit. Its glove tore. A thin thread of blood floated, froze, and adhered to the conduit as a dark bead. The skirmish bodies converged. More of them entered the dome from the far breach, moving with coordinated urgency. Their helmets were smooth like the liaisons, but their gait was aggressive, actuators tuned for speed. They fired rails in overlapping arcs, not at us directly, but at our cover points, collapsing them, forcing us into open. The storm cycle ticked down. My visor flashed a warning, comms degradation rising. We detonated the first charge. The coil housing ruptured. Composite shards spun outward, slow and low gravity but deadly. The central conduit flexed and snapped. The phase-reactive slurry vented in a dark cloud that did not disperse like gas. It clung to itself, forming tendrils in vacuum, pulsing with faint light as if alive. When the slurry touched metal, frost formed instantly around it, as if it sucked heat from everything. The static in my teeth became a sharp ache. The skirmish bodies hesitated for the first time. Their helmets tilted. Their postures shifted as if receiving conflicting commands. The handler sent a burst, rider destabilization. Keep breaking coils. We moved to the second coil under fire. The point pair took hits. One rail shot through a shoulder joint, venting oxygen. Sealant fired and held. Another hit through a helmet edge, cracking visor layers. The soldier's face became a smear behind frost. Telemetry dipped, but stayed alive. We placed charges. We detonated. More slurry vented, drifting in black ribbons. The laborers continued working until the couplings failed and canisters floated free. Some laborers reached for them, hands moving with routine devotion even as the process collapsed. One laborer grabbed a floating canister and held it against its chest plate like a child holding a relic. A skirmish body struck that laborer with a cutter blade, not to kill but to force release. The blade carved into the laborer's arm. The arm split. Blood froze into a red crystal cloud. The laborer did not scream. It simply released the canister and returned its damaged arm to its side as if it were a tool that had broken. I did not feel anger. I noted the movement. I fired a rail shot through the skirmish body's neck seal. The body vented and went limp. We reached the third coil. This one was deeper in the dome, closer to a central tank where the slurry was densest. The tank was large, held in place by rusted braces and new organic growth that looked like tendon. It pulsed gently, like a heart. The handler sent a burst. If tank ruptures, unpredictable. Possible transit event, possible field collapse, possible chain reaction. Command sent a simpler burst. Deny mobility. Complete denial. Those two instructions sat on my visor like overlapping stains. We placed charges on the third coil anyway, because obedience is a habit deeper than thought. The storm cycle hit early. The EMP spike rolled through the refinery belt like a silent wave. My visor went white for a fraction of a second, then it rebooted in minimal mode. Half my icons disappeared. Drone feeds went dark. The hum of the suppressor collar on the liaison beacon distant in the corridor faded to nothing in my memory, as if the whole system had blinked. In that moment of electronic blindness, the enemy moved closer. I saw a skirmish body in front of me, cutter blade raised. In low gravity, it drifted forward with controlled thrust, aiming for my neck seal. My rail carbine was half-cycled. the capacitor recharge lagging after the EMP. I did not have time for a clean shot. I used the plasma cutting round. At close range, the jet punched into its chest plate and burned through. The body jerked, then went slack. The jet continued, cutting into the dome rib behind it, leaving a glowing scar that cooled into black glass. The smell of burned polymer filled my filters. My suit warned of contamination. The handler sent no bursts. Comms were down. We were alone in our helmets with whatever we could see. We triggered the charges manually. The third coil ruptured with a violent twist, not an explosion, but a tearing. The central conduit snapped. The slurry vented in a dense mass that drifted upward toward the tank, drawn by field forces that no longer behaved correctly. The tank shuddered. For a second, the dome interior filled with a pressure sensation in my skull, like being squeezed. My teeth hurt. My vision blurred at the edges. The slurry pulsed brighter. Then the tank's braces failed. The tank floated free, drifting slowly in low gravity, dragging organic tendon growth with it like stretched ligaments. It rotated, the slurry inside sloshing as if it were thick. The rotation brought a coupling port into view, an interface port that looked too deliberate to be random. A skirmish body reached for it, hands moving with urgency. It latched onto the port and pressed its helmet to it, as if trying to merge. The moment its helmet touched, its body seized. Its limbs went rigid. Then it went limp and drifted away, as if emptied. The tank pulsed again. A transit event tried to form. I cannot describe it as a portal in the dramatic sense. It was a distortion in the visual field, a subtle bending of light and geometry near the tank, as if space was considering folding. Dust and frost fragments drifted toward it and vanished. Not exploded, vanished. The dome ribs near it creaked under stress. My suit screamed warnings in red: field anomaly, structural instability, unknown radiation. We were supposed to deny mobility. This was mobility trying to be born. I fired 2 rail shots into the tank's outer shell. The shots punched holes. The slurry sprayed out in thick ribbons. The distortion flickered. The tank's pulse faltered. A laborer drifted into the anomaly zone, drawn by routine or by the field. Its hands reached toward the tank as if to steady it. The anomaly caught its fingers first. The fingers vanished cleanly. The laborer's body jerked, not from pain I could hear, but from a sudden change in balance. It floated backward, blood freezing into a red spray from where fingers had been. It did not scream. It did not flail. It simply stared at its hand stump through a cracked visor, as if trying to compute a new routine. I shoved it away from the anomaly with my shoulder. The laborer spun slowly and collided with a dome rib sticking there. The distortion collapsed fully when the slurry vented enough to break the field coherence. The tank drifted, now leaking, becoming a dead object again. The skirmish bodies stopped moving. Not all of them. Some continued firing, but their patterns were erratic, no longer coordinated. One turned its rail pistol on a laborer and fired without reason. Another fired into the dome roof. Their helmets tilted as if listening to a command that had become noise. We had cut the coils. We had ruptured the conduit. We had destabilized the extraction chain. Whatever controlled them had lost its clean channel, at least here. I should have felt relief. I felt only the growing weight of my suit warnings. Oxygen at 30%, coolant leak worsening, actuator lag increasing, contamination indicator pulsing. We withdrew through the dome breach in the direction of the corridor we had opened. We moved past floating bodies, skirmish suits and labor suits alike, some intact, some vented, all silent. Frost settled on them in slow dustfall, turning them into statues. In the corridor, the liaison beacon still blinked, operating on a local power cell that had survived the EMP. We passed it. The liaison was still anchored, still restrained. Its telemetry, visible through the collar's low-power feed, was low but stable. For a moment, its helmet turned toward me. Not fast, not threatening, just an angle shift, as if acknowledging motion. Then my visor flickered and the feed dropped. Comms were still unstable. I could not tell if the movement was real or a sensor artifact. Command's extraction icon never arrived. The storm cycle interference persisted. Our corridor marker remained, but the follow-on units did not come. We waited in the refinery canyon, tucked beneath conveyor ribs, oxygen ticking down, coolant freezing at my hip, actuator lag making each movement slow. The squad survivors sat against metal, tethered, heads bowed, not in prayer but in fatigue. After a long time, a distant vibration traveled through the refinery skeleton. Not sound. A mechanical tremor, something heavy moving in the belt. Perhaps follow-on, perhaps enemy, perhaps cleanup. A new packet arrived at last, compressed and cold, returned to pickup point. Maintain contamination protocol. Do not bring unauthorized biologicals. Do not transport captured intermediaries unless cleared. The liaison beacon remained behind us in the corridor, still blinking. Secure. Contain. Protect. Dispose. The icon was still ambiguous. We left it. I did not look back. That is not virtue. It is habit. Looking back doesn't change the math. At the pickup point, a cutter shuttle descended into shadow, its hull coated in ablative frost. The shuttle's bay doors opened like a mouth. Decon lights washed over us, stripping color from everything. Automated arms extended, scanning seals, sampling residue, injecting neutralizers. My contamination indicator flared when the scanners reached my helmet. The arm paused. A red icon appeared, cognitive exposure suspected. I felt my pulse, not as fear but as a physical fact. My mouth was dry. My suit's oxygen tasted stale. An automated syringe pressed into my neck seal and delivered a sedative in a chemical cocktail meant to suppress neural activity patterns. My vision softened at the edges. The static in my teeth dulled. As I was guided into the shuttle bay, I saw the handler in the corner, restrained, helmet tilted downward. Their telemetry was flat and controlled, but a warning icon hovered above them, compromised. Command had not sent words of thanks, it had sent protocols. In the shuttle bay strapped to a bench, I initiated the mandated black recorder. The device was a small block clipped to my suit chest plate. It listened. It did not care about tone, it cared about content. I began the confession because compliance is easier than resistance when you're tired. I described the corridor, the siege growths, the labor cast, the liaison, the probe, the dual presence, the coils, the slurry, the attempted transit event, the collapse. As I spoke, my thoughts stayed factual. But behind the facts, something moved like a shadow behind glass. A sensation I could not place. Not a voice, not a command. More like the memory of being watched from inside. I had seen rider control from the outside. The probe had confirmed it. The handler had warned of residual. Now, in the quiet of the shuttle bay, with sedatives in my blood and the black recorder blinking, I felt a faint second rhythm in my head that did not match my heartbeat. A slow pulse, distant, patient. Not enough to control me. Not enough to speak. Just enough to remind me that contact leaves residue, and residue becomes a problem someone eventually decides to sanitize. The shuttle lifted. Gravity pressed lightly as thrusters engaged. The refinery belt fell away below, a rusted corpse wrapped in chemical frost. On my visor, a final external camera feed showed the corridor we had opened as a thin, dark line through the dead metal. Frost drifted across it like ash. The passage looked clean from above. Then the feed cut, either by interference or by choice. The last thing I saw before sleep took me was the inside of my visor frosting at the edges, turning the world opaque one slow millimeter at a time. The end. narrative fades into the background, leaving you in a quiet sector of the night. Nothing approaches, nothing threatens, just rest.